Boy, it's not easy at the moment because let's look at what he's doing. First of all, I think tactically he's very, very smart in doing lots of stuff and doing it quickly. So he's actually outrunning these talking heads on the news networks.
My guest now is Doug Casey, founder of Casey Research, and he's the author of several best-selling books, including Crisis Investing and The International Man. Most recently, he's known as the author of Speculator, a fictional adventure, and Moral Defense of the Art of Speculation and of those who engage in it. He joins us today from Punta del Este. Doug, thanks for coming back on the show. How are you?
I'm good, Albert, and I suspect better than most people that are suffering snow and cold in northern climes. Right now I'm on the beach in Uruguay. I think you can see it out there.
Yeah, you treated me to that view just earlier, just magnificent. And I have to hand it to you, Doug. You know, most people when they say they're going south for the winter, they're talking about Yuma, Arizona, or something. Not the southern hemisphere, certainly not where you are. Looks just magnificent. And the other thing is, you're the only one I know who, just to have a cup of coffee or beer with, have to engage in a geography lesson.
Well, I think it's incumbent upon all of us to make the world our oyster. It's a tiny little planet, unfortunately, so that people that act like potted plants and just stay in the area where they were born, I think are making a tragic error.
Absolutely. Missing out on a lot of fun, too.
Yes.
So today is January 30th, and we have Donald Trump starting his second week as president, and just unleashing a wave of executive actions, from immigration to rollbacks of certain legislation, the types of things that you talk about, although you call them market distortions. And I certainly think that's what we're seeing here. And the thing about this president is the market distortions go down to individual companies as he decides to tweet them out. I'm guessing that you see a ton of speculative opportunities based on just the hands-on approach the president is taking.
Well, yeah. Boy, it's not easy at the moment because let's look at what he's doing. First of all, I think tactically he's very, very smart in doing lots of stuff and doing it quickly. So he's actually outrunning these talking heads on the news networks, where he does things so fast that they can't get any mileage out of it. I mean, it's one thing after another after another. So this is very smart. It doesn't give them time to harp on these things. Secondly, most of the things he's doing economically are good. He's getting rid of regulations. He's setting the right tone for the country. This last Christmas was the first Christmas I can remember since I was a kid when it was actually okay to say Merry Christmas to somebody. So he's changed the social tenor of the country to some degree, and I think that's a good thing. On the other hand, he wants to
yeah, well, the immigration as an example.
Well, that's an example, and that was done very, very inappropriately, very poorly, inconveniencing a lot of people that shouldn't have been inconvenienced. So it's a mixed bag, and of course he wants to put a tariff on everything that comes into the country. He thinks that's going to make America great again, which it's not. It's more likely to act as something that's like the Smoot-Hawley tariff in the 20s, bringing on the Greater Depression. So I think Donald is going to be a one-term president for a lot of reasons, and I think he could go down in the books as another Herbert Hoover. in a background of Western culture, of Western civilization. And I understand how that can scare them. It's a scary thought for Americans. But my answer to this is to not have passports, not have visas. Anybody should be able to go anywhere in the world as they wish. There are two provisos that make that reasonable, however. One is there should be zero welfare to draw in parasites who want to take advantage of it. Because when people were immigrating to the U.S. in the 19th century, the first half of the 20th century, we did just get the best and the brightest from all over the world because they came here on their own nickel and they had to support themselves. That's not the case now. I mean, my understanding is the U.S. government has paid for a couple 100,000 Somalis to come here, and then we have to pay for them to be here. And it's insane. So, number one, anybody should be able to go anywhere, but there should be nothing to attract them other than opportunity. And number two, all the property in the country should be privately owned. So when somebody gets off the plane or gets off the boat, unless they have a deal with the person that owns that property, be it a hotel room or whatever, they have to get back on the plane because they have to be able to support themselves. So that would solve the problem. I'd like to see Trump do that, but that's out of the question. So.
Yeah, and I think the biggest objection would come from the domestic welfare recipients, right? It has nothing to do with immigration. The biggest recipients of this are people right here.
Oh, no, the huge welfare apparatus in the U.S. is not going to go away until the whole thing collapses. Because out of the, I don't even know what the current number is. Let's say it's $3 trillion plus that the U.S. government spends every year. About a third of it is military related. About $1 trillion, security, state, military, so forth. And the rest of it is almost all some form of welfare. We've got 100, literally about 100 federal government welfare programs, aids for dependent children, and on. But the big ones, of course, are Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid. No way are those going to vanish until the situation collapses, perhaps with the destruction of the dollar or the overt as opposed to the covert bankruptcy of the U.S. government. It's already bankrupt, of course. Its liabilities far exceed its assets.
Yeah, and interestingly or paradoxically, the solution to all this is supposed to be more spending, and yes. This is going to happen through infrastructure projects, but none of this can happen without the central bank's involvement, I think, because I think borrowing it will be difficult. They certainly don't have it. Taxing it is not going to be an option either. What is your near-term outlook for the U.S. dollar?
Well, all these currencies are going to reach their intrinsic value. And the question is, what's their intrinsic value? And I would say basically zero. It's an unsecured liability of a bankrupt government. So it's a question of which one reaches its intrinsic value sooner. The inflation figures, cost of living figures that come out of Washington are only marginally more accurate than the ones that used to come out of Argentina. It seems to me, just my anecdotal observations, is that prices are going up much faster than is indicated by these figures. So I don't know. I speculate in these currencies from time to time when one looks really cheap or really dear. But, Albert, I just like to buy gold and buy silver every month and put it away in cash form. I mean, that's my answer, I guess, to the currency situation.
Yeah, and that plays into obviously your long-term view, and same as mine, that the dollar has nowhere to go but down. In the meantime, though, who knows?
Well, we could have a deflationary collapse. That's entirely possible. And at that point, what would happen? Stock market crashes and trillions of dollars of value are wiped out. The bond market collapses with higher interest rates, trillions of dollars of funny money value. Banks collapse. Maybe the U.S. government can't bail them out fast enough. So if that happened, we could have a deflationary collapse, and the dollars in your possession would be worth more because there are fewer of them out there. I think that's the last thing they want to see happen, a redux of what happened in the early 30s.
Yeah, absolutely. They also don't want to see a hyperinflation either. What are your thoughts on that scenario? Certainly it would be an accident like a nuclear war if that were to happen.
Yeah, well, it's unbelievable the amount of currency units that they've printed up since the crisis started in 2007. And they're still printing them up. And the U.S. government is going to have bigger budget deficits. On the one hand, one of the good things about Trump is as he cuts these regulations, and I believe he's succeeding in getting rid of them, the economy could do much better. But when you cut these regulations, you're breaking somebody's rice bowl that is relying on those regulations. So he could cause, by doing smart and good economic things, he could actually cause some serious bankruptcies among the people that are relying on these regulations. So I don't see any way out at this point. I really don't. But the good news, and I think we probably talked about this last time, is that there's the average person, even if he's economically ignorant, still tries to produce more than he consumes and save the difference, looking out for his own welfare in like a reflexive, genetically programmed manner, number one. And number two, advances in science and technology, which are continuing. So regardless of all this incredible and dangerous government stupidity, things continue to get better. I think that the ascent of man is going to continue regardless of the Greater Depression or, God forbid, World War III. I mean, what's the most likely place where World War III could start at this point? My guess is the U.S. government provoking the Chinese government by sending aircraft carriers right off its coast. It's about as provocative as if the Chinese government sent its Navy off the California coast. I mean, who knows what could happen?
Doug, if you want to say one thing good about Trump, I would say that he has the instincts of a capitalist. Even though he's a politician now, he does still have instincts of a capitalist, and you sort of see that in his language and some of the things he's trying to do, the regulations he's trying to remove in favor of business. But what are your thoughts in general of running the government like a business? Every so often someone comes up and says they're going to run the government like a business, and that's exactly the way Trump appears to be behaving with all of these press conferences and whatnot. He looks like the chairman of a holding company, the federal government holding company with the 50 states as subsidiaries. What are your thoughts in general of that arrangement or that attitude?
Well, I question the right of the U.S. government to exist in its present form, because my view on what government should do, since it's coercion, it's force, it should only defend its citizens from coercion and force. That implies an army for force outside the country, strictly defensive, police force to protect you from force inside the country, and a court systems to allow you to adjudicate disputes without resorting to force. So that's all the U.S. government should do. But it doesn't do any of those things effectively. It tries to do absolutely everything else. Now, as far as Trump trying to run the country like a business, first of all, the government shouldn't be running the country. And the government, and it's not, I mean, I understand his trying to act efficiently as an executive and so forth, but it shouldn't be doing any of these things. It should just do the three things that I mentioned earlier. But within the context of the current corrupt system, which I totally disapprove of, yeah, I suppose he's doing the right thing. If you look at it within the current parameter of what people idiotically think is correct, yeah. I don't know if I'm being clear or not.
No, well, yeah, you are to me. I want to start winding this down, but Doug, I always am curious about what you're up to, where you are, and also what you're reading. You're an incredibly curious person, and so tell us what's occupying your mind these days.
Well, other than Trump, who I actually try to watch every day because it's so entertaining, and just so, just to re-clarify, it's wonderful that he's trying to cut regulations and taxes. I approve of that. Don't approve of the other things that he's doing, but I think it's very interesting. One last thing, it's almost like we're approaching the state of a civil war in the U.S. because the people that are in agreement with what he's doing, kind of the red states against the blue states, they viscerally hate each other at this point. This is a very dangerous and a new situation. This has never happened before in my lifetime, anyway. Anyway, I just wanted to say that. But what am I reading? I am not getting to read too many books these days, which annoys me a great deal. Mostly I'm reading articles. But the last book that I did read about 2 weeks ago was by Gay Talese, who completed it in 1982, called Thy Neighbor's Wife, which is the story of the sexual revolution in North America. Very interesting, very well done, almost written in the form of a novel. So I consider it a good thing that the sexual revolution was fought and won. And I recommend that book, incidentally, Albert.
All right, thank you very much, Doug. And before we go, I just want to let the viewers know you've been very vocal about wanting to see Doug more on this show. Seriously, Doug, they can't get enough of you. Even the people that don't like you are always on commenting. So you're definitely a big draw. And I'm really happy to announce that Doug and I have been talking about starting a podcast together. And I want to gauge your interest. So Doug's time is very valuable. He's interested in doing it, but please let me know if that's something you'd like. We shoot for once a week, and this would not be a market podcast, though. We'd be talking about all kinds of things: philosophy, speculating, topics that he'll be covering in his books, in his fiction books. Doug, anything you want to say about this collaboration that we've discussed?
I think it's got a lot of potential, Albert, because I think we will use as a jumping off point for it something that's been done recently that I think is some of the best writing and most interesting thoughts since Shakespeare, which is quite a mouthful. Incidentally, the other thing I've been reading is some Sherlock Holmes stories, which are not part of the Sherlock Holmes canon. They were written by Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, but are not generally included. So I've been reading those too, and I'm a big fan of Sherlock Holmes in his now many reincarnations on television and movies. But at least initially, we'll be talking about something other than Sherlock Holmes too.
Right. So please let us know if you're interested in that. The best way to keep informed would be to join my mailing list at powerandmarket.com or follow me on Twitter at Albert K. Liu. Have news on that shortly. Doug, before you go, where are you going to be traveling to in the next few months?
Well, regrettably, I've got to leave the beach here in Punta and leave Estancia de Cafayate in Argentina, which is where I am when I'm not here. I've got to go to Miami for a business meeting for 4 days next week. But other than that, I'm just going to stay here in South America because it's peaceful and mellow and inexpensive, and the weather's good this time of year. Everybody should be down here. But if everybody came down here, it would be like Calcutta or something. So maybe that's not such a good idea.
Okay, so I guess we'll have to wait for Casey's comet to circle back to the northern hemisphere sometime in the spring or summer.
Yeah, that'll be great, Albert.
Okay, so thank you very much for joining me, Doug. Please check out his company, caseyresearch.com, and don't forget Amazon.com has his new book, Speculator. It's a great read. I thoroughly enjoyed it. You look at the reviews piling up, 5-star reviews all over. People are loving this book. So please check that out.
Thank you.
Go ahead.
I've got to say one other thing. This rather shocked me. John Williams, who some of your listeners may have heard of, he's the founder of Autodesk, which is a big CAD/CAM company. He's a very rich guy, and he just lives in Switzerland, and he does what he wants to do, which is read books. He reads several hundred books a year and reviews them. And he gave Speculator kudos for the best novel of 2016. I don't know if you were aware.
I didn't know that.
So
That's great. Maybe can we link? Is there a review that we can link to in the show notes?
Yes, I think so.
Okay, I'll definitely get a hold of that. So that's great news, Doug. Congratulations.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Albert Liu, host of the Power and Market Report. If you enjoyed this video, I invite you to subscribe to my channel by clicking the button on the top left of the screen. And don't